Well, Albie, I want to start off by talking to you about Sadiq Khan. Now, you know I don't like doing this, but I've decided to do it. Sadiq Khan is backing France's latest move to hike parking fees for SUV drivers. That's according to the Daily Mail. But the real folly here, I think you've got to ask yourself, our political class, their devotion to net zero, these fantasies that they keep telling we're about, that threaten to leave we're, frankly, shivering, penniless and vulnerable. So I say, forget French politicians. We ought to look at its farmers. Farmers rebelling against eco-madness, fighting not just for France, but for the West's survival. Europe eats more than it grows, and the net zero solution is to slash our food production. It's as daft as curing your obesity by amputation. They're joined by German farmers protesting fuel tax hikes, Dutch farmers defying nitrogen limits. It's the kind of European solidarity that even I can get behind. They're making our Brexit vote look timid. We'll need oil and gas for years to come, and thank God for that. They actually lifted us out of the dark and into the light. Literally. This isn't just about parking fees or you, Les. I think it's a dire warning. And the French farmers are actually leading the charge. They're the vanguard in a fight for a future not ruled by frost, financial ruin or Greta Thunberg. A future where common sense trumps frigid, costly and confusing net zero delusions. Now, Belinda, I'm sure you're in agreement with the French farmers.
Well, I think EU regulations have made farmers' lives a misery. You know, they have drones going over their fields. You can't trim a bit of hedge or anything now without being having a complaint made. And the sad thing for our fellow European friends is that they can't vote these eco net zero nutters out. Like, at least when ours start preaching from the green Bible of a middle-class vanity project, we can turf them out very, very quickly. At the next election, we have a choice. They don't over in the EU. They get it inflicted upon them. And, you know, the suicide rate of farmers in France is so high, especially compared to the UK, because farmers are unable to make a profit barely as it is with all the regulations and the environmental hoops they have to jump through. And they're destroying it all for what? We should be supporting farmers across Europe.
Ben, do you think actually we'll see similar kinds of movements happen here in Britain? Because in Scotland, for example, you've got lots of big farming communities, Wales the same, and they're saying, look, I'm at the end of my tether here with all these policies coming forward.
Well, I think what you find with people generally is when their backs are against the wall, as we saw in COVID, and when it comes to the crunch, people find the resolution and the will and the courage to stand up for what's right. In terms of all these protests, there's many different aspects to them. The key one, as far as I'm concerned, especially in Holland, in the Netherlands, is the net zero, draconian net zero rules, where they're trying to cut emissions by all sorts of insane thing that we saw in COVID, where 2 or 3 years down the line, people will say, I never pushed for that. I never wanted to advocate for this or for that. They'll be so embarrassed at the ridiculousness of pushing for net zero that they'll try and distance themselves from it completely.
I mean, the idea, have you got no shame to try and say that you're on the side of farmers? When the Brexit campaign went to people in farming communities across this country, they said, you'll lose your EU subsidies. I know that'll be a nightmare for your businesses, but we'll give it you back. Did they? They did not. Farmers have struggled worse than most because of Brexit in this country. And the second point about net zero, it is massively popular. It was in every major party's manifesto. Polling consistently shows that most people agree with it. And we have seen too many parts of the world, you know, a third of Bangladesh underwater last year from the worst ever floods. Countries in the Commonwealth that won't be habitable in 10 or 20 years' time.
That's nothing to do with French farmers, Ben.
We have a responsibility to tackle climate change. And if that means a few French farmers changing their ways, then good.
Are you
Well, I
kidding?
think that's absolutely outrageous because actually, what do you do? We've just seen in the Middle East, for example, the fact that the Houthis are firing rockets and goodness only knows what else at maritime ships. What will you do? What is your bright idea for when we have to rely on the stocks we've got in Europe and actually your net zero delusion has meant that we don't grow food here any longer?
You know what's so nonsense about your argument is that one of the reasons that we are seeing more war and more famine and more disaster is climate change. We are seeing more immigration because we're seeing more people from that part of the world need to leave where they live because it's becoming too hot to be hospitable and moving to places like
Even
Britain.
if that was true, it's got nothing to do with the farmers. And in terms of the Brexit thing, you say, oh, we lost the subsidies. They get subsidies in France and they're still rioting because subsidies only help massively rich farmers. It's the small and medium-sized farmers that don't get the subsidies, same as in this
That's a
country.
really
always
important
have to
point.
bring everything back to net zero. There have been problems with farming in Europe for decades before net zero commitments. Farming is subsidised. It would not be profitable without subsidies. There is something fundamentally which does not work with farming in Europe. And I think, Darren, your obsession with net zero week after week after week, you need to get over the fact that net zero
because it's one of the greatest sins ever cast on this country.
It's a popular policy.
No, it's not.
Let's have a referendum on net zero.
Let's have it. Let's have
zero
it.
would win.
They'd lose in a heartbeat.
Net zero would win.
Oh, well, they said that about Brexit.
It's true. It's a very popular policy. Why hasn't anyone started a movement for a net zero referendum?
Because there are so many lies. There's so much propaganda. Yes, we have. We're getting rid of the net zero. No, that is not true. The backs of the British people and Europeans is being stripped bare by the taxes and constant hoops we're having to jump through for no reason. If UK sank into the sea, it would have no impact on climate change.
Let me ask you this. If net zero was so popular, why is your own Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, scaling back on net zero commitments? And why, as soon as he announced those adjustments to the policies, including pushing the dates back for petrol and diesel cars, why did he go up in the polls immediately?
The Prime Minister's committed to net zero by 2050 because the UK...
So I don't answer the question.
Because the UK has actually overperformed when it comes to its journey to net zero. We were able to push back that automotive vehicles target from 2030
So you admit
to
it's going to make people poorer, and that's why Rishi Sunak rolled back on it?
No, he moved the electric vehicles target back because the UK is outperforming what we thought we were going to do.
And he's not just done that, he's granted new North Sea oil licences. As soon as he did that, he shot up in the polls, the Tories shot up. If the Tories today said we're scrapping net zero, they'd probably win the election.
No, they wouldn't.
Right.
They would. What nonsense.
Still ahead this evening.
He just said the Tories won't win the election.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.